What if the voice in your head, the one that never stops analyzing, predicting, replaying, is not helping you at all? What if the thing you trust most, your ability to think things through, is the very thing keeping you stuck? Because right now, somewhere in your life, there is a decision you've been circling. Maybe it looks small from the outside, a message you haven't sent, a path you haven't chosen, a risk you haven't taken. But inside your mind, it has expanded, layer by layer, into something enormous, heavy, complicated, dangerous. And so you think, you turn it over again, you simulate outcomes, you rehearse conversations, you try to find the version of the future where nothing goes wrong. But here's the problem. The more you think, the less clear it becomes. And the dream, the thing you actually want, is not more thinking. It's peace. Clean, quiet certainty. The ability to decide and move without carrying the weight of 10 imagined futures behind you. So the question is no longer, how do I think better? It's this: why does thinking feel like a trap in the first place? The Stoics began with a distinction most people never make, a line so subtle you can live your entire life without noticing it. The difference between what happens and the meaning you attach to it. For Marcus Aurelius, writing alone at night after long days of war and politics, the world itself was never the true source of disturbance. It was the interpretation, the silent commentary layered over reality. He wrote, "We are disturbed not by events, but by our opinions about them. And overthinking, if you strip it down, is not an excess of intelligence. It is an overflow of opinions. Too many interpretations forming at once, none allowed to settle. You don't trust one version of the story, so you generate 10 more, and then 20, until the original moment disappears beneath the weight of your own analysis." But that raises something uncomfortable. If thinking is supposed to clarify things, why does it so often bury them instead? Watch what happens in your body when you overthink. Your breath changes, it becomes shallow, irregular. Your shoulders lift slightly as if preparing for impact. Your eyes move, not focused, but scanning, searching. You are not calmly analyzing. You are preparing for danger. But nothing is happening. No threat in front of you. No immediate consequence. Only possibilities, floating just out of reach. Overthinking is not a reaction to reality. It is a reaction to imagined futures. And this is where the Stoics draw a boundary most people never enforce. They called the future externals, things outside your control. Not because they don't matter, but because they cannot be stabilized through thought. And yet that's exactly what the overthinking mind tries to do. It tries to solve uncertainty by expanding into it. But what happens when you try to control something that has no stable form? Here is the shift that changes everything. Overthinking is not a thinking problem. It is a control problem. You are not searching for better answers. You are searching for certainty. You run scenario after scenario, not because you lack intelligence, but because you cannot tolerate the gap between action and outcome. You want guarantees, but the world does not offer them. And so your mind compensates. It builds simulations, predicts reactions, rehearses consequences. It creates the illusion of control, but the more you simulate, the further you drift from reality. Because reality exists only in the present, and overthinking lives almost entirely in the future. So you end up in a strange position, working harder and harder while moving nowhere. And if that's true, if overthinking feels like progress but leads nowhere, what is it actually doing for you? It's protecting you, not from failure itself, but from what failure might mean about you, because if you follow the spiral all the way down, past the surface-level decision, you find something deeper, a fear of being wrong. Not practically wrong, existentially wrong. You chose badly, you misjudged, you failed to see something obvious. You became the kind of person who makes mistakes. And so you try to prevent that identity from forming. You think longer, harder, more carefully. Not to find the best option, but to build a defense. If anything goes wrong, at least you can say, I thought it through. But here's the quiet truth most people never confront. No amount of thinking can protect you from being human. And if that's the case, why does the mind keep trying? The Stoics had a word for this distorted self-protection, philotia, a kind of misdirected self-love, not caring for yourself, but guarding your image of yourself. And the solution was not to abandon the self, but to redefine it. For them, you were not your past decisions, not your reputation, not even the story you told about yourself. You were something much simpler, your attention, your intention, your response, right now, not yesterday, not next week, not in the imagined aftermath of some hypothetical failure, now. And this creates a radical shift, because if the self exists only in the present, what happens to all the future scenarios you've been obsessing over? They lose their authority. And that brings us to something subtle, but incredibly powerful. The role of language inside your mind. Overthinking is rarely visual. It's verbal, a running commentary. What if they think this? What if you fail? What are you supposed to do? Notice something strange about that voice. It doesn't speak as you. It speaks about you, as if you are being watched, evaluated, judged, because in a way, you are. Your mind is simulating other people, running models of how they might respond, carrying an entire invisible audience inside your head, and trying to satisfy all of them at once. But what happens when you try to live under constant observation, even imagined observation? You become paralyzed. Seneca saw this long before modern life amplified it. He wrote that true freedom comes from indifference to the opinions of others. Not rejection, not isolation, but a quiet independence. The ability to act without needing constant approval. Because approval is unstable. It shifts. It contradicts itself. It depends on perspectives you cannot control. And if your decisions depend on something unstable, your mind will never settle. This is why overthinking feels endless. Because you are trying to satisfy variables that have no fixed solution. So the question becomes, what would happen if you stopped trying? Not stopped caring, but stopped outsourcing your decisions to imagined voices? What remains if the audience disappears? What remains is uncertainty. And this is the part most people resist. They think the goal is to eliminate uncertainty. But the Stoics aimed for something very different. The ability to live inside it, to act without guarantees, to move without full visibility. Because uncertainty is not a flaw in the system. It is the system. Epictetus understood this in the harshest conditions imaginable. As a slave, he had no control over his environment, no guarantees, no safety. And yet, he built a philosophy not around control, but around clarity. Clarity about what belongs to you, and what never will. And if you blur that line, If you extend yourself into things you cannot control, what happens? You dissolve into them. You lose your center, because you're trying to stabilize something inherently unstable, and no amount of thinking can fix that. Which brings us back to the body. Because overthinking isn't just mental, it's physical. Tension in the jaw, tightness in the chest, restless hands. Your body believes something is wrong, and it responds accordingly. The Stoics saw the body as an instrument of reason. Breath, in particular, was central, the bridge between mind and action. So when the mind spirals, the simplest interruption is not another thought. It's a breath. Slow, deliberate, grounding. Not as a trick, but as a return to the only place anything real can happen. But if the present moment is always available, why do we keep leaving it? Because the present feels small, and the future feels important. So we abandon what is real for what feels significant. But significance without reality is just imagination. And imagination without limits becomes anxiety. So here's the model. Not a technique, a perspective. Imagine your mind as a room filled with everything you know, every memory, every scenario, every possibility. It's a rich room, but it has no exit, so you walk in circles, rearranging thoughts, revisiting ideas, mistaking motion for progress. The Stoic move is not to improve the room, it's to leave it. But where does the door lead? Back to the present, to what is actually happening, not what might happen, not what could go wrong, just this. And from here, a simple separation emerges. What is real versus what is imagined. The email versus the story about the email. The decision versus the identity attached to it. Strip away the narrative, and something surprising happens. The situation becomes smaller, manageable, clear. But if clarity is this simple, why do we resist it? Because clarity removes excuses. When the noise fades, you are left with something direct, a choice and responsibility, without the buffer of endless analysis, without the illusion of preparation, just you and the next step. And that is where most people hesitate, because stepping forward means accepting risk. But staying still has its own cost: time, energy, life itself, paused in the name of safety. So the real question is not whether you will face uncertainty, it's whether you will face it moving or standing still. The Stoics called the state we're aiming for ataraxia, not perfect calm, not absence of difficulty, but undisturbedness, the ability to remain steady, even when things are unclear, even when outcomes are unknown, even when the future refuses to cooperate, because somewhere inside you there is a point that is not affected by those things, a place that can observe without being consumed. And if that place exists, if you can access it, then overthinking loses its power. But only if you trust it. And that trust is something you cannot think your way into. So here is where we end. Not with certainty, but with an image. You are standing at the edge of a decision. In front of you, countless paths, each one leading somewhere unknown. The overthinking mind wants to map them all, predict them, control them. But that was never your role. You were never meant to see the whole path. only the step in front of you. And maybe that's not a limitation. Maybe that's the design. Because clarity does not come from seeing everything. It comes from seeing what is here, without distortion, and acting anyway. So don't ask, what's the perfect decision? Ask, what is real right now and what can I do about it? Everything else, let it move.